Welcome to the Elijah Rising podcast. Elijah Rising is an organization empowering women recovering from sexual exploitation. This episode is going to help you become more aware about the issue of sex trafficking and inspire you to take action.
Welcome to the Elijah Rising podcast. I'm your host, Micah Gamboa, and today I have a very special guest. Her name is Jessica Gobble. She is Elijah Rising's recovery specialist. She's a lived experience expert and just incredibly knowledgeable, full of the spirit, and we are going to get such a treat. This is actually episode 2 in a series that we're doing around drug trends and addiction and recovery in the anti-trafficking space. So if you haven't listened to episode 1, you can go back one podcast and listen to that one. I highly recommend it. But we're excited to have you back, Jessica. Thanks for being here today.
Thanks, Micah. I'm glad to be here.
So we are just going to jump right in.
Okay.
We have so much content to cover. You are like this wealth and repository of knowledge. And so I want to give you all the time that you need. But, you know, we've been talking a little bit about why do we even focus on addiction and recovery? Aren't we doing like anti-trafficking, right?
Yeah.
And we've been talking a little bit, you explained so beautifully in episode 1 of like, why those two worlds are merged, how there's so much overlap rather. But so let's talk about what you're seeing, trending, things that have changed maybe even in the last couple years.
Yeah.
We've seen a lot of new developments in the recovery space. Can you talk to us a little bit about like what drug trends are you seeing? What do people out there who are in this field, what do they need to know, be mindful of, and be watching for?
Sure. And I really feel like everyone needs to know this. So parents need to know this. People who would consider themselves recreational drug users, I think it's important for everyone to know. And obviously in the anti-trafficking movement, I think we need to really be on top of this. So one of the things that's recent is that there's a stimulant resurgence. It's sort of like a pendulum swing. There was this big opioid epidemic, and fentanyl had gotten so much press because of the large number of deaths, which we'll get to, that people sort of went to the other extreme and thought, I'm going to stay away from this, and there's been this stimulant resurgence. So stimulant use has become really the most popular it's been since the 1980s when crack was brand new. So
wow.
It's huge right now. And I think there was this misconception by people using drugs that if we use stimulants, we'll be safe from fentanyl. The problem is that stimulants are cut with fentanyl. It's like everything is cut with fentanyl now. It's in everything.
And can I just ask you, why is that?
Yeah. So if you think about it from a marketing perspective, if you are a dealer and you have an opportunity to make money off of 2 products,
sure,
by giving someone one product that contains another product that they will become physically dependent on, then it makes sense from a marketing perspective.
Sure. Okay.
So also fentanyl is super cheap.
Okay.
So people put it into drugs to enhance the effect of the drugs. And so if someone thinks they're smoking crack, they don't even realize that they're actually getting fentanyl.
Wow.
It's going to give them an enhanced high. It's going to be cheaper for the person producing the crack.
Right.
And they're going to end up with a customer who now wants fentanyl and crack.
Okay. I totally derailed you. I apologize. You were talking about stimulants.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry. That's really helpful though to know. Okay.
Okay. And then there is a trend of ketamine use. Ketamine has become famous recently because Matthew Perry died because of ketamine use. And ketamine is used by some professionals in therapeutic ways, and that is not what Matthew Perry died from. Matthew Perry had been using ketamine in ketamine therapy, but that's under the guidance of a medical professional.
Okay.
What is a trend is, and especially among young drug users, is skin popping ketamine, which is using a needle in the skin, not intravenously. And that's kind of become trendy. And it's weird. It's become even more trend, like there's more demand since Matthew Perry's death. So there's something kind of
that is very, very
cryptic,
weird. Yeah,
about that. The big thing that's worrisome to almost everyone that I talk to in the addiction profession is xylazine. Xylazine, which is sometimes called the zombie drug, is not illegal in a lot of states. Texas is one of them.
Okay.
It is a veterinary medicine, and it is used to cut and enhance drugs, and it is in most states, it's in the entire supply. So everything that was cut with fentanyl is now being also cut with xylazine. And part of the reason that that's scary is that xylazine does not respond to Narcan. So if someone is overdosing and they're given Narcan or naloxone, it is not going to stop the effects of xylazine on them. Now, you still, if you were to see someone overdosing, you still should administer Narcan because a lot of times it's cut with both fentanyl and xylazine, and the Narcan will help with the fentanyl. But in addition to that, it causes skin infections. It causes ulcers in the skin that can turn into like gangrene type infections. People are dying from the infections, and it's not at the site of injection. So it's not like just for people who are using it and they're getting an infection from their drug use. It has that effect on the body, so that a drug user might get a sore anywhere, which puts them at additional risk for other infections, right? So it's just horrible. There's also a trend of Seroquel use being misused. Seroquel is a mental health medication. It's normally prescribed for, let me think. I just went blank. Bipolar disorder, schizophrenia, anxiety disorders, and there's been a lot more of it prescribed since the pandemic. A lot of young people have had mental health issues. So there's more Seroquel out there because it's been prescribed so frequently. And I've read that the trend is that young people are taking the Seroquel, and normally it would put them to sleep. It would calm them down and put them to sleep. And they're trying to stay awake past the point that they would fall asleep or feel the calm. And so they can kind of feel a buzz by overusing it. There's also a new thing called gas station heroin. I don't know if you've heard about this. It was in the news yesterday. Yesterday, I just saw that there was a big multi-state recall. It's legal. They sell it at gas stations. The drug is actually called tyaneptine, and it's marketed under lots of brands, but the one that there's a recall for is called Neptune. And it's in a lot of gas stations, but there have been multiple states that have made it illegal. And now yesterday there's a huge recall because there have been all kinds of medical problems, people ending up in the ICU intubated as a result of taking this substance that they're buying at gas stations.
That is just over the counter.
So, and it's physically addictive. So you have a physical withdrawal similar to heroin, which is why they're calling it gas station heroin.
Wow.
So
this is wild. It just feels like that we are in this kind of free-for-all, like tailspin. I don't know, with like in the substance space, like that drugs. And correct me if I'm wrong, so I'm not super familiar, but it feels like they're getting more pernicious, more deadly, more ubiquitous even, and very subtle ways that these people who are creating the drugs are really subverting or capitalizing on the market.
For sure. One of the things that I've noticed is that as the stimulants resurgence happened, I noticed that there were all these legal things, like I said, xylazine is not illegal in some states. So there's this new move to try and take the fear that people naturally have of some of these drugs away by saying that it's legal. And I think that started with the legalization of marijuana in a lot of states. And there was this narrative that if it's legal, it must be fine.
Yeah, it's safe.
And it's not addictive and it's not harmful. There are recent studies that actually recent findings. It's not even a study. The studies have been done. The recent findings have been published. It's been added to the DSM-5 that THC, which is the ingredient in marijuana, is recognized as causing mental health issues.
Wow.
There's a huge amount of material that supports these this evidence that it causes psychosis in a great number of people who use THC. And part of it is that the THC is so strong that they're using, that it's causing negative effects on their mental health. It's causing this pot-induced psychosis. And now they're recognizing that it's also addictive. So
after so many states have already legalized it.
Yes.
Oh, wait a minute.
Yes.
Hang on. There are other,
Yes.
indicators that we weren't really aware of or weren't watching for.
Yes.
That's very concerning.
Yeah. Interesting. I saw that the governor of California is one of the governors who is wanting to make xylazine illegal.
Interesting.
So even though it's not illegal
Yeah.
in all states, I thought, okay,
Well,
maybe they're
yeah. recognizing
recognizing that this can be a problem and they want to nip it in the bud.
And so that we've seen, let's just take fentanyl, for example, that the death toll has climbed over the years or even over the months, right? Like becoming more and more as people use it more, becoming more ubiquitous. Like we've seen the fallout be larger. So I imagine that even with some of these other drugs that may be over the counter or maybe legal, that we could potentially have that same situation on our hands.
Yeah. That's one of the reasons I think they've acted so quickly to make this tianeptine be recalled so quickly.
Sure.
Is that they're on top of this because they're recognizing that some of these drugs are poison. Fentanyl is being called poison.
Yeah.
Right now, people are being prosecuted for poisoning people when they overdose on fentanyl. Fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin.
Wow.
100 times stronger than morphine. So if you think about that, it makes sense that it would be considered poisonous, right? It's just crazy.
That's wild. Can
Yeah.
you talk to us a little bit about, we hear a lot in the news about fentanyl, right? I'm so glad that you're bringing to the table, though. There's but there's a little, let's zoom out. There's we're talking about a buffet of options for drug use that are all concerning, really deadly, very concerning, that we need to be aware of, especially when we're doing shelter work, right? Because we're serving a population that either typically has a drug use history or maybe they've had a forced drug use history. I mean, they're coming to us with something, right? Yeah. So let's just talk about fentanyl, for example. Can you talk to us about, because I think that's like a buzzword. We hear it so much.
Yeah.
It's been so popularized. Why is it so dangerous? Why is it so concerning?
Yeah. So the potency is the main thing. Historically, when someone had a drug problem and you wanted to get help for someone, we would talk about people needing to hit a bottom. People who care about them might wait until things get bad enough so that they can use that as an opportunity to offer them help. Yeah. The problem with fentanyl is that there's this whole just don't die movement. People can die so quickly on fentanyl the first time they use it. So, and it's not the people that would typically be thought of as who will die from a drug overdose. Sure. Because there are now pressed pills. It's so commonly pressed in pills that look almost exactly like. They're so good at this.
They take the form of another drug.
Yes. So people, a college student may think that they're getting Adderall. They call or they respond to an ad online or message someone online to get an Adderall so that they can stay up all night and study, and they end up dying that night because it's been pressed with fentanyl, because fentanyl is so cheap. Gosh. And again, fentanyl is going to make the effects be more felt of whatever it's mixed with, right? And it's so cheap. So the dealers are using it rather than having to use more expensive substances, and they're cutting everything with it. I talked about this last time I was on a podcast with you guys. Fentanyl is the number one cause of death. Fentanyl overdose is the number one cause of death of 18 to 45-year-olds. Gosh. So last time I was here on this podcast, the death rate was 64,000 that year. Wow. 64,000 18 to 45-year-olds died from fentanyl overdoses. Last year, that number went up to over 112,000.
Oh my gosh, that's almost double.
I know.
Whoa.
So from 64,000 to 112,000. And I said I had read an article that it was talking about these young people dying deaths of despair, and that fentanyl was such a sad drug, and that they're not having an opportunity to outgrow this sort of traditional recreational drug use stage because fentanyl is so deadly, and that the amount of deaths were equal to taking an airplane and filling it with college students every day of the year and crashing it. And that was when it was at 64,000.
Oh my goodness.
So now here we are, over 112,000, and that's in 2023. And that's just fentanyl overdose. That's not other drug overdoses.
That's crazy.
I know, and that's not talking about the damage done when someone overdoses and doesn't die, but they have problems from oxygen deprivation to the brain. But of those, that's 306 deaths per day of 18 to 45-year-olds last year. That is like filling 2 airplanes now, 2, every single day of the year and crashing them.
That's wild.
It's crazy.
And the reason, just to bring it kind of back home, because, within the anti-trafficking space, when you're talking 18 to 45-year-olds, I mean, that is the demographic that we're serving. I mean, by and large, right?
Yeah.
At least for Elijah Rising, our safe home, we serve adult women who are in the home, and that's 18 and up, and we see typically they don't go over a 45-year-old age range. So that's like literally the demographic that we're going after, that we're serving, that we're trying to reach, pull out. I mean, that is just tragic.
It is. I will say that something that I've noticed in the resurgence of stimulants is that traffickers do not want to lose their investment.
Sure.
So they do not, as much as they can, or as much as they're willing to make an effort, they do not want to lose the people they're trafficking. So that is part of the reason that stimulants have become so popular and prevalent with traffickers. And although stimulants are cut with fentanyl, it's not the same thing as just giving someone fentanyl.
Like straight fentanyl.
Right. So although there are traffickers who will want their the women that or the people that they're trafficking to be completely incapacitated.
Yeah,
so
that's
that
true.
they might, and
That's
then there's
true.
an additional risk.
Yeah.
My
goodness. Okay, so last question. We know we're seeing that the market is changing, right? Even since COVID, I would say, we've seen a dramatic shift in just this whole idea of how drugs are being moved and sold and buying and what types and all of that. So can you talk to us a little bit? I have heard this very briefly recently. I don't know much about it. What they call like an open air drug market.
Sure.
What is that, and why should we be concerned?
Okay. So open air drug markets sort of gotten a lot of press recently. It's actually not a new thing. What that means is an area where drug dealers know they can sell drugs and drug buyers know they can buy drugs somewhere out in the open.
Okay.
So if you think about it, there have been like notorious areas of big cities like San Francisco Tenderloin where this has existed for years and years. What's new is that because of the pandemic, bars and clubs and places where people would traditionally what people who would call themselves recreational drug users who didn't have a regular dealer would normally be able to go and find someone there selling drugs. Those places shut down.
Right.
So they had to find a new way to sell drugs. So open air drug markets started to pop up in areas where they wouldn't normally be in different cities. And now there are areas in different cities where, and part of why that's a concern for us is in those open air drug markets, the person who is actually handing out the drugs is very often someone who's being trafficked. So
can you go further into that? Can you explain that? That is just fascinating and tragic at the same time.
Yeah, it is. It's really sad. So very often someone is in a position of vulnerability because they have an addiction. And so a dealer will say, I will give you what you need. I will give you drugs if you will stand here and be the person who is the face selling the drugs, which puts them at they're then having all of the risk of the criminal act.
Absolutely.
Of being persecuted. Prosecuted. And it removes the risk to a great deal for the actual
trafficker
dealer.
Or the dealer.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they also use them to run drugs and deliver drugs. So something else that happened during the pandemic is people started getting them more online, messaging.
Yeah, sure.
And so they will use them to be drug runners, and they're going to be the ones that are caught with the drugs.
Yeah. Right. And that's just another layer of vulnerability, exploitation. And we've seen this in our home. I mean, that's like, okay, you got busted for drugs or prostitution or something like that, but that's not that's not actually what's going on behind the scenes. Right. So it's not always as cut and dry as you see people on the news or whatever,
Law and Order.
That's not always the full picture. And I see these traffickers, pimps, whatever you want to call them, like really hiding behind multiple layers, which are individuals who are bearing the brunt, bearing the burden, receiving the punishment that's really not due them. Wow.
It's really sad. And with the crackdown on fentanyl, because it's been in the press so much, they are in many states having really severe penalties. So someone who is delivering one pill that contains fentanyl now could end up with a very long-term sentence for delivering poison, especially if the person dies. And it could be someone who is being trafficked.
Yeah. Who's being forced to do that. And that's, oh my goodness.
Yeah. And very often really young people.
Gosh. And then that's their whole life in front of them. Wow. So that's why, that kind of, won't go into this today, but that the complexities and the vulnerabilities around this population, the women that we're serving. I mean, we're talking about not only we've touched on, sex trafficking, forced fraud, coercion, physical abuse, verbal abuse, right? But now we're talking about a forced addiction. Now we're talking about criminality. I mean, there are so many layers to this of what a safe home really needs to kind of know and be prepared to go in with services for this population. It's so complex.
It is.
Well, is there anything else as we wrap up that we haven't touched on today around kind of what the drug trends are, what we're seeing that we haven't touched on that you would like our listeners to know?
I really always want to encourage people, find out about this, because if someone is starting in this life, the sooner they can get help, the better. So just like with trafficking, if you see something, say something. I think the same is true. If you have a friend or a family member who is acting different, or something is just telling you something's off or not right, especially with the potency of the drugs that are around now, do not wait until... You don't have to wait until they hit a bottom.
Gets bad. Yeah. That's really good advice. That's really, really good advice. Jessica, this was so amazing to hear kind of your perspective and your knowledge. You have such a wealth of information. So at the next episode, our third and final episode, we are going to be talking more specifically about how we touch on addiction and recovery within the Safe Home program. So I can't wait to touch on that. If you have enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, share, spread the word, right? We want people to be recovered and to be these risks to be mitigated in their lives. So we would love for you guys to do that. We appreciate y'all listening in. Jessica, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for joining us today for this episode. If you were inspired by this content today, please share, rate, and leave a review. Also, please consider making a donation at elijahrising.org/donate. Your support helps us continue the vital mission to combat sex trafficking. Until next time.